Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another session of Ask Dr. Saleem. A very warm welcome, an extra warm welcome now that we're on the verge of winter. In this session, everybody is free to ask in whatever questions they have, whether it is pertaining to the Quran or Islam and such. And the questions can be asked in Urdu or English, but the answers will be given in English just so that we can reach a wider array of audience. And so with that, we already have our first question. Rafia Khwaja, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Dr. Shehzad, my question is, can a Christian woman who's married to a Muslim man inherit his property?
The answer is yes. Why not? The distribution of inheritance between family relations, between spouses, is operational, just as it is operational between Muslims, between two Muslims. So, regardless of the faith of the inheritors or the heirs, the distribution shall go forth. The misconception has arisen because there are some narratives which say that disbelievers cannot inherit from Muslims and vice versa. But we have to understand that the word disbeliever used here is in relation to those disbelievers who had intentionally denied the truth in the time of the Prophet. And as a punishment for this denial, they were stripped of this benefit of inheriting from one another. So the word kafir used in this narrative it specifically refers to those disbelievers who had intentionally denied the truth, and the truth had been conveyed to them by none other than the Prophet himself, and this was a punishment for them. But for all later non-Muslims, which of course cannot be called disbelievers either, there is no such restriction or no such stipulation. So today, any amount of the family could be composed of a mixture of Muslims and non-Muslims, and the inheritance will proceed the way it has been described in the Quran.
So she doesn't have to be a Muslim. It could be a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu. It doesn't matter. Or is it has to be Ahle Katab is the only women who will be allowed?
That is a condition for, it's not a condition, it's a suggestion for marriage. Many women from the people of the book are allowed to be married to Muslim men, but vice versa has not been allowed. But that is another story. As far as inheritance is concerned, once that marriage has taken place, the transfer of inheritance will proceed the way it has been described in the Quran.
Oh, thank you very much.
So our next question asks, in Surah Al-Imran, verse 200, it says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu isbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. So the question asks, does the word la'allakum always has an element of doubt in it, or can it be used in Arabic without any element of doubt? Only a logical consequence of some action. Just like how we say it in English, drink water so that it may quench your thirst.
Right.
Here, I might not be using the word to show any doubt, but only to express the logical consequence of drinking water.
Yes, indeed. The word la'allakum is not just used to express something which is not certain. It is also used to express the consequence of something. It is also used to express hope in something. So la'allakum it encompasses, in fact, the word la'alla in Arabic encompasses all these three or even some more variety of meanings. So because of the fact that generally it is translated by our translators as, in the sense that something may happen or so that it should take place. But as I said, the word itself has the ability to encompass in itself the reason of the meaning of consequence. So that as a result of which, so you can translate it as a result of which, and also in the meaning of high hope or high expectation of something to happen. So all these meanings are incorporated in this word, and it depends on the context, the choice. The occasion of the verses which through which we can take a final select the final meaning amongst these three meanings.
Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Saleem. The next question is from Huzaifa. Please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
Walaikum
मेरा आपसे
salam.
सवाल था कि मैंने सूरह अल अला पढ़ी है, उसमें तो मुझे पढ़ के ये समझ लगी है कि कुरान पहले सहीफों में भी मौजूद था। क्या तौरात, ज़बूर, इंजील भी कुरान की ही तरह थी? ये सवाल है
No,
मेरा।
the verses that you're referring to in Nahazal of Fil Ula it actually refers to the previous verses. It's not that the Quran, I mean, what is mentioned in the Quran is also found in the previous scriptures, not the Quran itself. In Nahazal of Fil Ula, Suhuf Ibrahim wa Musa is referring to the teachings of the Quran, which are just mentioned prior to this verse. So basically, the verse is telling us that these teachings are not new. They are found in the Torah and Injil also, and Suhuf Ibrahim and Musa, in the scriptures of Abraham and Moses also. So it's not referring to the Quran, but to the content and the basic teachings of the Quran, which have been alluded to in this surah earlier on.
अच्छा, वो अल्लाह ताला कुरान में फरमाते हैं कि हमने मूसा को तौरात दी जिसमें हिदायत है और नूर है, मगर हमारा तो अकीदा ये है कि तौरात में तो वो क्या होगी है, क्या कहते हैं, मिलावट होगी है, तो फिर ये थोड़ी कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन बात नहीं हो जाती?
This shows that in spite of this interpolation, the Quran, the Torah still has guidance and light. In fact, the words which are used by the Quran are Furqan, and it distinguishes between good and evil. So the Torah was given in its original capacity when it was revealed, when it had not been tampered with, in the same status as the Quran. So the Quran itself is a Furqan, which means contains guidance and decisive guidance. So the Torah also contains decisive guidance, but this refers to the time when it was revealed. Of course, later on, it was tampered with, it was interpolated. But even after this tampering and interpolation, you'll find that a number of things which are found in the Torah as translation, they still hold quite good. And some of the major areas in which this interpolation has been done refer to the prophecies of the arrival of the last prophet. Similarly, the induction of Isaac as the son who was intended to be sacrificed by Abraham. So there are some very, very pinpointed interpolations in the Torah. Otherwise, even after losing the original language of the Torah or the original script of the original manuscript of the Torah, we still have translations, and those translations are quite close to the original, as I said, except some of the areas that I've just pointed out.
ठीक है, शुक्रिया। और मेरा एक और सवाल था कि मैंने सूरह तलाक पढ़ी है और सूरह बकरे को चाहते पढ़ी है, तो मुझे तो पढ़ के ये समझ लगा कि करे कपल की आपस में तलाक हो जाती है, फिर वो दोबारा शादी कर सकते हैं, तो इस बारे में मैं गलत है कि मैं ठीक हूँ इस बारे में?
Yes, is absolutely correct. So the Quran tells us in Surah Baqarah that you have to just pronounce a single divorce sentence, and that separates you from your wife. And within the iddat period, you can have recourse to, you can take back your words, and as a result of that, your wife will be remarried to you. And if the iddat period passes, then you can have nikah again. But this can be done twice in a single relationship of marriage. So if you divorce your wife on two separate occasions and you take them back within the iddat period, then this is possible. But if you divorce her for the third time, then there is a whole procedure which has been suggested. So the Quranic directive for talaq is that you just give one talaq, just pronounce one divorce, and you have the choice to either take back that divorce within the iddat period, and if the iddat period expires, then you can always do a nikah again, and she would be your wife again.
अच्छा, मेरा एक और सवाल था कि मुझे तो अगर कुरान में यार देखें तो बार-बार वाक़ीम सलात व आतो ज़कात का ज़िक्र हुआ है, क्योंकि फिर तो सलात तो हम आधे से ज़्यादा सब मुसलमानों ने कायम की हुई है, ज़कात सब मुसलमानों ने कायम की हुई है। फिर भी हम लोग वो कामयाब नहीं हो पा रहे, और सॉरी टू से ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा काफ़ी मुसलमान भी गलत काम करते हैं। एक ये सवाल था, तो क्या एक वो सूरह अनफाल में एक आयत है कि अपने हिस्से में से 5वां% दो, क्या वो हम पे देना फ़र्ज़ है अभी भी? और वो मेरा कि क्या ये सलात का मतलब निज़ाम नहीं हो सकता, क्योंकि वो बार-बार हर जगह उसको गौर व फ़िक्र के लिए बयान किया गया?
At every place, it has not been mentioned as a thing for deliberation. It's mentioned as to establish the prayer, and when you say establish the prayer, it refers to the prayer that we offer 5 times a day, and that has been given to us through the established sunnah or the established practice of the Prophet. So this was pre-existing, and even before the Quran was revealed, the prayer or was being offered by the prophets of God, and it was the same prayer to which the Quran has directed us to offer, and that is what we have to understand. It doesn't refer to any system. The word as-salah has an article of definition, which is the alif lam, which refers to the salah which is being offered by the Prophet and his companions in the society, and the Quran is just referring to it. So you have to understand that the source of religion is not just the Quran; it is the person of the Prophet. And from the person of the Prophet, we have obtained this religion through the established practice of his own self, as well as from the Quran. So the established practice is something in which you'll find mostly the worship rituals being offered to us. And let me recall your second question. What was your second question?
सूर्य अनफाल के बारे में कि सूर्य अनफाल में एक आयत है, मुझे बोलिए कि आपको पांचवा हिस्सा
spoils of war, and the law for the spoils of war was particularly, it was meant in the times of the Prophet when there was no standing army, and the believers were asked to use their own means and resources, and the wars which were fought were the wars of the Prophet himself, which he was actually required to wage war when the Almighty had himself given this directive. Today, of course, as far as the spoils of war are concerned, if there is a war, then they will go to the state, and they shall not belong to the army. So in those times, 1/5 was given to the state, and 4/5 was distributed amongst the soldiers, because it was through their own personal weapons and other means that they fought. And so therefore, the war booty was distributed to the army as well. But today, in the presence of a commissioned standing army, which is a paid army, and of course, also the fact that these wars are not the wars which the Almighty had asked his Prophet to fight, which has a very specific background to them. So today, if a war is waged, a legitimate war is waged, and if you get a war booty or the spoils of war, then they shall go to the state and to the state treasury, and that's how they'll be spent.
Jazakallah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Related to the first question on the law of inheritance, we have a few more questions. So there are 3 hadiths that are mentioned here. The first one is the Prophet, peace be upon him, says that the believer does not inherit from a kafir, and the kafir does not inherit from a believer. And the Muslim does not inherit from a kafir, and the kafir does not inherit from a Muslim. And it's also said that people who belong to 2 different religions do not inherit from one another. And this is reported by Abu Dawud in Sunan and a few other scholars. So about these hadiths, it seems that the direct addressees of any prophet were either glorified by God in this world or punished in this world, based upon their acceptance or rejection of the truth. So whenever punishment was announced for those specific groups of people, which are the direct addressees of the Prophet, all ties were broken between them and Muslims, just like they'll be broken at the Day of Judgment for people who will be punished to go to hell. So for those specific people, does it not make any sense to give them any inheritance to or from them? Because the above mentioned hadiths are related to those specific people, and the rest, the Quranic law of inheritance, is solely based on blood and marital relationship, which doesn't have to do with religion. So in relation to that, with the law of inheritance, because Quran depends upon religion, or it's solely dependent on marital or blood relationships, can a Muslim son inherit from non-Muslim parents or vice versa?
I think I've already answered this question very long, and I've said and referred to these narratives, and I've said that these narratives relate to the era of the Prophet of God, and they form a punishment between for disbelievers for denying the truth. And today, these narratives are not applicable because the word al-kafir is used, and this refers to people who have intentionally denied the message of the Prophet Muhammad. And as a result of this, they were punished in various degrees. And one of these punishments was that they were stripped of these rights of inheritance. So this is not the case today. So whoever is your heir, regardless of religion, will inherit from the deceased person,
even if they admit to being, for example, atheists or otherwise.
even if they are.
Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Saleem. Our next question is from Adil Qureshi. Please go ahead.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shahab.
Walaikum assalam.
So, Dr. Shahab, about the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's lifestyle, I think the general notion that we have is that the kind of lifestyle that he used to have was that days went past and he did not even have things to eat. And he used to fast a lot because one of the reasons was that he did not have much to eat. And when his daughter asked for a servant, he denied her as well, and telling her to instead recite Tasbih Fatma and all. So, but I think I've heard some other counter narrative that this was only for a short period of time. Otherwise, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was fairly wealthy, and he had sufficient money. Is that true? And secondly, if that is true, what was his source of income after Khadija passed away?
So you have to make this distinction in the life of the Prophet. In the Meccan period, he was a fairly rich merchant, and he used to go on trade journeys and earn a lot of good merchandise. I mean, sell the merchandise and earn a lot of money. And he had a very comfortable life in Makkah. However, in Medina, he imposed on himself a very strict and austere way of life because a number of people had migrated with him to Medina. And amongst them was a group of people who could not be adjusted in the Medinan society. And they were actually given a place in the mosque of the Prophet, the Masjid Nabawi. And there was a small embankment on that mosque, in that mosque, in which they would, it's like a raised place, in which there were tents that were put up. And these people who could not be adjusted in the Medinan society, in that bond of brotherhood, which was chalked out as the Muakhat Medina between the Medinans, the Ansar, and the Muhajirun. So these leftover people were made to inhabit this place. And the Prophet said, whenever something would come to him, he would give preference to these people, and he would always send anything that was in his home or cooked in his place in his kitchen to these people. And even if something came out from outside, first preference would be to these people who were inhabiting the mosque. So it was in these instances when it became tough at times for the Prophet to even have something in his own house. So, but that was a very short period. And remember, it was a Medinan period only, when the Prophet thought that because these families had migrated with him to Medina for his cause, so therefore he is responsible for their upbringing. So he had imposed these restrictions on himself. And as far as his own income was concerned, the spoils of war, the war booty, was fixed by the Almighty. The spoils of war were given us. He was given a certain share. And so, as a result of that, once these wars were fought, for example, the Battle of Badr took place in the second Hijrah, and then so on and so forth, when the considerable war booty came to Muslims, so that part of that war booty was also something which was reserved for the Prophet and his even for his relatives. So that was the time when slowly things started to improve, and his own standard of living vis-a-vis the food issue was concerned, in which he had to at times, really sacrifice. It started to improve. So this particular time, probably for a couple of years, this was specifically in Medina, when in the initial period, there were very few people who could provide for these migrants from Mecca, and the Prophet himself never liked that he should be lavish on his own self. So he was very austere on his own self, and there were days at times when things like meat could be cooked, and his wives would also say at times that this is how things are. And he said that unless the lot of these immigrants improves, he would not take anything for his own self. So this was like a self-imposed austerity drive on his own self. But as I said, when wars were initiated, so the Quran itself fixed a share for the Prophet. So ma afa Allahu ma afa Allahu I mean ahlil kula falillahi wa rasulihi wa lizil qurbas. Whatever the Almighty gives you in the form of fair means battles which were fought, in which, I mean, there was no battle which was fought, but Muslims were able to conquer without even fighting a battle. So for in that particular wealth that was captured, there was a share for the Prophet, and then in the spoils of war also there was a share for the Prophet. So this is how his livelihood was arranged in the later or in the middle part of the Medinan period, and then it continued to the later part as well.
So, just a related question to this, Dr. Sahab, Hazrat Khalifa Umar bin Abdul Aziz is said to have a very lavish lifestyle. But the moment he became Khalifa, I think we've been told that he only used to have this one, he literally just lived with only one garment or something. So,
Mhm.
does that build that relationship that to be, pious and you have to essentially let go of these worldly possessions and all? Or
So basically,
was that done?
this was the practice of the rightly guided caliph. So Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, Ali, they all imposed themselves this self austerity, in which they said that they would live with the same standard of living as the common man, as the poorest of people. So we find all these caliphs, in spite of at times being very well off, that they imposed on themselves the same standard of living as that of a poor Muslim. And this was also revived later on by Umar bin Abdul Aziz, as you just referred to. He was a person who was given to a lot of luxury. He had a lot of fanfare around him. But as soon as he became a caliph, he gave up all that. And so this was like the pinnacle of being a caliph, that you live the life of a common man. And this was something which was, as I said, set as an example by the first four caliphs, and it was revived by Umar bin Abdul Aziz, and it did continue for some time in some of the other caliphs as well. But slowly and surely, things changed, and caliphs became really lavish in their lifestyle later on. But this is one of the recommended things of the rightly guided caliphate, the Khulafai Rashidun, that if you assume a public position, if you're elected at a public office, then your standard of living should be that of a common man, so that you are able to realize and also get or fully get to know how tough life is for such people. And if you are given to luxury, then there is a big chance that you would not be able to come closer to the needs of the common man.
All right, sir. My last question is around a very different topic, actually. So, in earlier sessions that we had around the five things that Allah Almighty has forbidden, I think in one of the famous ayahs, probably from Surah Araf, I don't remember,
Right.
where I think one of the things that Allah explicitly forbids us from is fahsha.
Mhm.
And then there's another ayah which is wala taqrabu zina.
Mhm.
So, I had a different understanding, but then somebody shared some other clip of you a few weeks back, which was referring to something else. So I just wanted to make sure that if I get clarification from your side as to what is your understanding of fasha and zina, and sorry, fasha and yeah. So as per my understanding, the uh, essentially zina is the thing that is forbidden. um, Self gratification is something that cannot come under either zina, obviously, and it cannot come under fasha either. So this is why you mentioned that in certain cases it may be permissible, the self gratification part, but the sexually explicit material that somebody is witnessing, that, as per my understanding, is definitely fasha, and that is something that is forbidden. But I think that understanding has been slightly challenged by somebody who said that no, these are considered as sadde zariya, and the sadde zariya is still towards that zina, because this is not explicit, because this is not zina, the act that you are not doing it yourself. So this is why it can't be given as the same forbidden category as those sins that are forbidden. But since it is a sort of brings you closer towards that, so in the form of a sadde zariya, you can call it, but it cannot be under the same severity of being forbidden as zina itself. So I just
Of
wanted to
course,
make sure if you could clarify your position. Yeah.
this is absolutely correct. I mean, the act of fornication itself is forbidden, And if someone indulges in that, so the sin of indulging in fornication is way more than doing things that might lead to fornication. Yes, that there is a difference, but then that doesn't mean that you are. I mean, you give a license to people that they can do anything and just avoid fornication. So things that lead to fornication, for example, we have been told to guard our gaze, to not let them take undue liberty. We have been told to wear a decent dress. So all these things, although they are not fornication itself, but indecent dress or letting our gaze take undue liberty, they can all lead to that thing which is forbidden. So if we contaminate our eyes and if we are not also well covered, then that of course is something which is a blemish, which is a mistake. And but the punishment of this mistake is not the same as the punishment of zina, of course, or fornication. There's a difference, but that doesn't mean that these things don't carry their own lesser form of punishment from God. They are sins, and they would be counted as sins in the eyes of God. And I mean, you have to make this difference or this distinction. But this distinction doesn't mean that things that lead to fornication are allowed, or they can be taken upon. As I said, these are things which will not incur the same amount of sin. The extent of sin would be less, but that would still be a sin. And these things, in my view, they do come under the category of fahsha, because you're viewing or seeing or whatever something which is indecent and which contaminates your eyes, and it, of course, is something which goes against the injunction of ghazul basar, which is mentioned in the Quran. And as a result of that, I mean, you can even go as far as indulge in fornication. But even if you don't, then that doesn't mean that these are, I mean, not forbidden. They are still sins. They still contaminate your eye and they contaminate your soul, and they have to be avoided.
Thank you very much. I'd like to remind all of our participants and viewers that we have the links to register for this session on the Facebook live stream webpage. So if you go there, you will see in the comments the link to register for this session, and there you'll be able to then join the WhatsApp group where the Zoom link is going to be shared. So we have another question that asks, in Quran, there's an incident mentioned according to which Prophet Sulaiman killed the horses who caused him to forget about offering the Asr prayer. And both Javed Ahmed Ghamidi and Amin Ahsan Islahi said that he was preoccupied with emotions. One shall not exact a general ruling from this incident, but they praised it a lot. So the question here is, no matter how pious the person is or whatever their intentions were, how on earth is it justified to kill an innocent being for one's own fault?
So first of all, the person who's asking the question might take a look at these verses again. They don't say that he killed these horses. What these verses say was that he actually became very angry on his own self, and he started to flash his swords on these horses. He might have injured some of them, but there's no mention of any killing. Of course, it was something which was done when he was overwhelmed with frustration and disappointment on his own self, and he thought that these are the horses, or this horse show was something which distracted him from the prayer. So it never was the case that these horses were actually killed. Yes, some of them were injured, but I'm pretty sure that because the Quran just mentions one part of the incident and not the rest of the part, and seeing his own personality, I'm pretty sure that these horses, the injured horses, were given due medical attention and they must have recovered. So this was never the case that he actually started killing them. What the Quran says, that he started to flash the swords on their bodies, which means that he perhaps did injure them or wound them, but it was never the case that any of them was killed.
Rafia, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Okay. Dr. Shehzad, I wanted to ask you, I feel that in Pakistan, religion is practiced as patriarchy. What would you comment on this, and what is your opinion? Because I find that it's the father who rules, and he can just tell you what to do, and the women part don't really, even if they don't understand, they will just follow the patriarchic system, which is very much present in our country. Am I wrong in understanding this?
Well, you're pretty much right, but I just add to this that this is not just the case with Pakistan. You can extend it to the rest of the world as well. So patriarchal societies exist all over the world. The only thing is that some of our societies have reformed and refined themselves in the last 50 years, maybe, to make them see, in a way that even patriarchal tendencies are checked in a certain way. But if you go maybe 50 years back in history, you'll find the pangs of patriarchal society, the ills of patriarchal society prevalent in so many societies, and women being mistreated, and also not only mistreated but treated in a way that is worse than at times what we would treat animals, and they would be treated as slaves. And this is something which is, as I said, it has the major part of the world involved in it. It's just in the recent years that there are some societies in which some civility has crept in, but then that civility too is not something which has still balanced affairs. The problem in third world countries, like in many Muslim countries, is that the factor of religion has also stepped in, and by certain misinterpretations of certain religious texts and their own understanding, some of these patriarchal tendencies have been reinforced. So one element that you can say is added in Muslim countries is the reinforcement of certain patriarchal notions, which if we analyze, you'll find that this is not exactly the case. But because of the popular misinterpretation, or the popular interpretation, I would say, that religion actually stands at the back of patriarchal societies, that these tendencies of patriarchal societies have actually, this has actually given them more fuel and added fuel to fire. But as I said, that this is something which is cultural. This is something which has been inherited for centuries. All over the world, societies have remained patriarchal. You'll not find a matriarchal society except in maybe some fictional works, and there are some people who do claim that they are matriarchal societies in some parts of the world, and we're still, still to hear word from them or news from them. They mostly exist in our imagination. So I think it's more of it's like a world situation that we are confronting. And what we need to do is that instead of reversing the wheel that is now spinning in favor of patriarchal societies, or patriarchism, I would say, what we need to do is check the evils of patriarchy instead of reversing it. Maybe patriarchal, the evils of patriarchy have to be reformed, and things have to be set right.
So, Dr. Shehzad, you agree that this practice is very common in the Muslim countries and the Middle East, and in our part of the world?
Of course, it is common, and it's common in the world as well. The rest of the world has just come to tackle this patriarchy, or the tendency of patriarchy, by certain sweet pills that they make us swallow. Otherwise, you'll find patriarchal tendencies in all first world countries as well. After all, how many presidents and chief executives are women? I mean, they can be counted on fingers. And how many are there? I mean, there are chief executives or CEOs of many organizations that have women at their top. But then this is just a recent happening. And this is more of a reaction to the oppression that women have faced as a result. And slowly things are making progress. But the inner, I would say, tendency of every man, every male, is to dominate. And that domination is something that needs to be checked. And it is being checked in a very subtle way, as I said, in many societies, but we still have a very far way to go.
But is it better in countries like in Tunisia, Morocco, or you think it's all the same all over?
You see, whenever religion is used in favor of patriarchy, which is the case in many countries, in which the clergy is actually interpreting religion, and of course they are doing so. So what they do is they reinforce the patriarchal pattern, because there are certain directives which, if interpreted the way they do interpret it, actually reinforce patriarchism in a very, very harsh, I would say, or in a very blatant way. And that is because of a misinterpretation of certain religious texts. But because that is not considered as a misinterpretation, it's considered to be the right interpretation. So what happens is that alongside this phenomena of patriarchism, which is existing in the society, something is added from religion as well, which makes it even more lethal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Huzaifa. Please go ahead. And because we're running short on time, I would like to request everyone to limit themselves to one question. And if we still have time, we can go over for second questions.
मेरा आपसे ये सवाल था कि क्या अल्लाह ताला ने 4 किताबें नाजिल की हैं, मगर अल्लाह ताला ने ग़ालिबन सूरह आल इमरान में या निसा में फरमाया कि हमने इब्राहिम को सहीफ़ा दिया और ग़ालिबन हज़रत इमरान को भी दिया, तो इस बारे में आप क्या कहना चाहेंगे?
I mean, this is a popular notion that people think that there's just 4 books revealed. There is no such thing in the Quran. But because of the fact that these 4 books have survived, that people think that these are the only 4 books. Otherwise, we find these books themselves, for example, the Torah, if you look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, you'll find books being given to the minor prophets. For example, there is a scripture given to Job called Ayub, to Jonah called Yunus. So they have their own scriptures, and they are found in the compendium or anthology that we today call the Bible. So these scriptures were given to all these minor prophets as well, and because they have survived within the Bible, that they don't figure separately. Otherwise, as far as scriptures are concerned, we do find that they were given to several prophets. But the famous among them were these 4 that have become so well known. Otherwise, the Quran says that there were many prophets who were given these scriptures, but not all of them, of course, but not just 4 that have become so famous.
Jazakallah.
Thank you. Yasin Fahad, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad.
Walaikum.
My question is about Hazrat Yaqub marrying 2 sisters at the same time. I think I read it somewhere, and I just wanted to know if that's true and why would that happen? Was it allowed at that time, or how was it?
Yes, he did marry 2 sisters, and it does seem that the Sharia at that time, marriage with 2 sisters was not as yet prohibited. It is perhaps the Quran which has prohibited a marriage with 2 sisters for the first time. This was not the case earlier on.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our next question is from Adil Qureshi. Please go ahead.
Dr. Shab, there is this practice of buying certain shares. I'm not sure about the actual technical word. I think it's called a shorting or something, where you somehow get the insurance. You know that some kind of business is definitely going to go down, and you either get it insured so that you can earn off the loss that this other business is suffering, or sometimes you try to buy and sell the shares with timings corresponding to that business going down. Is earning profit on that kind of stock trade halal?
Well, you see, the kind of thing that has to be avoided is that when it is guaranteed that the gain of one is going to be the loss of other at all cost. So this is something that has to be avoided. Other than that, in stock markets, what happens generally is that they are volatile. They don't depend on natural factors, and the prices within the stock market, they rise and fall, not out of natural causes, but because of so many factors, including political activism, etc. So I think that in normal situation where you're buying and selling stocks in this case, and that's something that can be done, and is unavoidable, and it should be okay. But if there is something, what we call that is a certain gain for something at the expense of loss for someone other, then that is an area or that is an economic activity, regardless of whatever we are doing, whether it's stocks or any other economic activity, that should be avoided. And that is generally what occurs in a lot of things that we call gamble. So when we gamble and we win, So in gambling, what happens is that one person is guaranteed to win at the expense of the other people. So, and this is precisely what gambling means. And there's I mean, others don't have a chance to win except, I mean, if they ride their own luck. So that is why gambling it has been forbidden. So anything which has this spirit in it should be avoided.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Naseem, you're up next. Please go ahead.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम शहजाद भाई, मेरे सवाल है हरूफ मुक़त्तात के बारे में। तो इसमें पहला तो पार्ट ये है कि जो कि बात की जाती है कि अरबिक जो है ड्राइव हुई है सेमेंटिक लैंग्वेजेस से, जैसे हिब्रू वगैरह, तो उसमें जो वर्ड हैं, जो लेटर्स हैं, उनकी कुछ शक्ल होती है, पिक्चर्स होती हैं। जैसे कि लिया गया है कि अलिफ को जो है वो गाय का सर है, काउ हेड्स। इस तरह लाम जो है वो असा या स्टिक है, और मीम जो है वो वाटर वेव्स है। तो ये बात बाज लोगों ने, स्कॉलर्स ने इस पे काम किया या ये कि उस वक्त के लोग ये बात ये जानते थे। तो यहाँ तो ये बात समझ में आती है कि जो इब्तदाई मुफस्सिर भी हैं, किसी ने भी इसके बारे में क्लैरिटी नहीं की है। तो ये बात तो समझ में नहीं आती कि उस वक्त के लोग ऐसे इसको जानते थे। दूसरी बात ये, कुछ स्कॉलर्स ने उस पर काम किया, जैसे कि हमीदुद्दीन फराई ने भी इसके ऊपर काम किया, और आपने भी इसको एंडोर्स किया। एक जगह मैंने आपका आर्टिकल देखा था मैंने। तो अगर ये वाली ले ली जाती है, अलिफ लाम मीम वाला जो बताया गया है, जो सूरह बकरा में तो केस ट्रू हो जाता है कि वहाँ मूसा अलैहिस्सलाम के वाक़या जिक्र किया गया, जहाँ पे पानी भी फटता है और असा भी उनके हाथ में होता है और गाय का भी जिक्र है। लेकिन सूरह आल इमरान भी अलिफ लाम मीम से शुरू हो रही है, यहाँ पे तो कहीं गाय का जिक्र नहीं है। तो अगर हम ये चीज लेते हैं कि तस्वीर वाला ये वाला मामला, तो कैसे इसको हम डिफाइन करेंगे? ये एस्टेब्लिश नहीं हुआ है इसका मतलब।
So if you're talking in particular about Surah Baqarah, so we do have the incident of the cow slaughter, which took place in the history of the Israelites when Moses had asked his people to slaughter a cow. Inna Allah ya'murukum an tasbahu baqara. And it is here that the cow head is actually mentioned. And the other thing that has to be understood is that these abbreviated letters, or the huruf al-muqatta'a, they are basically names of the surah. And if you don't know the meaning of a name, it doesn't add anything or subtract anything from God's guidance. So basically, it's an endeavor to know the philosophy behind naming surahs in this way. And this is what our scholars have pursued. So pursuing the reason why a particular surah has this name is an additional exercise, is an additional intellectual exercise. For example, if I call you Abu Bakr or I call you Umar, and I know it's your name, and if I don't know the meaning of these words, it is something which doesn't matter. Of course, if I know the meaning, it will add something to my knowledge. So similar is the case with these surahs. There are names, these huruf al-muqatta, these are names of the surahs. This is something which is established, and this is something which is held by many authorities. The next step is to find out the hikmah, or the wisdom, that why were these names kept. So this exercise in which these abbreviated letters there, people try to find out what they actually refer to, is an exercise in which why things have been named in such a manner that is being conducted. And as I said, we have sparing knowledge at this time of all these words, because not all of them survive for the meaning that they convey. So we know, for example, the word noon actually referred to the fish. And Surah Noon wal Qalam, we know the incident of the fish being mentioned there, La takun ka sahib al-hut. And then we know that the letter Ta, for example, represents the serpent. And we have the anecdote of Moses and the staff turning into a snake in Surah Taha. So we have reasonable evidence to show that there are many words which are linked to some of the themes which are found in those surahs. But this is still an ongoing research, and there are many letters still that need to be researched. But my submission is that even if we are not able to find what each of these words or letters signify, it's of no consequence, because it's just an exercise to find out the meaning of a certain word, the meaning of a name. And that's just additional information. It is nothing which is going to add to your guidance that is needed to succeed in the hereafter. It's just an additional sort of thing. So if you don't know the name of a certain thing, all that you can say is that, well, I am devoid of this wisdom, that what exactly was the reason that God kept this name. But as I said, it has no, it doesn't have any consequence or significance that can be of an extent.
नहीं तो इसमें फिर ये भी तो ठीक है, आपकी बात दुरुस्त है, लेकिन इसमें जैसे 6 सूरतों में अलिफ लाम मीम आया, तो क्या सब सूरतों में यही इस अलिफ लाम मीम का जो है वाकया हुआ है, या अलिफ लाम रा जो है वो 6 सूरतों में आया है? तो क्या वहां पे भी सब यही मामलात है, एक ही उसमें जो थीम है उसका? इसी तरीके से वाई ओनली 29 चैप्टर में ये यूज हुआ है और 14 यूनिक है मेरा ख्याल, बाकी रिपीट हुए हैं बहुत जगह पर, तो बाकी चैप्टर्स को क्यों नहीं नाम दिया गया, इन्हीं को क्यों दिया गया? और जो इस वक्त प्रेजेंट नाम हम देखते हैं तमाम चैप्टर्स के, वो कहाँ से आए फिर, अगर सूरतों के नाम ये थे?
We have to understand that there are certain surahs which were named by God, and these were the 29 surahs in which these abbreviated letters appear. But the rest of the surahs were not named by the Almighty Himself. The names were given by the Sahaba themselves. Even in the case of the surahs for which the Almighty Himself gave names, for example, Alif Lam Mim is the name of Surah Baqarah. The Sahaba went on to still give another name. So Alif Lam Mim is called, this is one name of the surah, and another name is Baqarah. So this was a very common custom in Arabia to call a surah or a composition by more than one name. And at times there was no name given. And because the Almighty did not choose to give a name, the Sahaba started giving the surahs their own names. So this was the practice of the Arabs of those times. And as far as the commonality of names is concerned, for example, Surah Baqarah and Ali Imran both have the divine name of Alif Lam Mim. Both begin with these letters. So Ustaz Aminuddin Farai has postulated that similarity in names actually signifies similarity in theme and content. And this is quite true regarding Baqarah and Ali Imran, because the theme of Surah Baqarah is to present a charge sheet against the Jews for their misconduct, and then they were actually deposed from their position, and Muslims were given this position, or the Ummah-e-Muslimah was given this position. And exactly on the same pattern in Surah Ali Imran, the similar charge sheet has been given, but this time the charge sheet has been given to the Christians. So the theme is the same. The only thing is that in the first surah, the Jews were given the charge sheet, and in the second surah, the Christians are given this charge sheet. And then in the middle of both surahs, and near the middle, we find the Muslims being given this responsibility. So you see, this similarity of names does tell us that there is a similarity of theme.
With that, Huzaifa, you're up next. Please go ahead.
अच्छा डॉक्टर साहब, मैंने आपसे एक सवाल पूछना था। मैं गुलाम जिलानी बर्क की एक किताब पढ़ा था, मुजमुअल कुरान। उसमें मैंने खैर उन्होंने जो रवायात दी थी, मैंने उस पर तहकीक नहीं की थी, मगर उन्होंने लिखा हुआ था कि हज़रत इब्राहीम अलैहिस्सलाम ने अपने भाई का नाम मुझे भूल गया, मगर उन्होंने अपने भाई की बेटी सारा से शादी की थी। गालिबन हज़रत इस्माइल या हज़रत इसहाक भी उन्हीं से पैदा हुए थे। मगर मैं कुरान पढ़ा था तो मुझे अब आयत नहीं याद कौन सी थी, मगर उसमें तो लिखा हुआ था कि आप अपने भाई की बेटी से शादी नहीं कर सकते। इस बारे में आप क्या कहेंगे?
You have to point out the place where it is said that he married the daughter of his brother. Where is it said? Where is this mentioned actually?
मैं वो
you have to give an exact reference for that.
ठीक है, मैं इंशाअल्लाह ताला कोशिश करूंगा, मैं आपसे वो आज डॉक्टर सलीम पे वो रेफरेंस शेयर कर दूं, मैंने क्योंकि उस पे तहकीक नहीं की थी।
Right, sure.
We have another question that asks, there are different ways to interpret the Quran, for example, interpretation based on hadith, or on the context, or on the dictionary. So what's the actual way that the Sahaba used to interpret the Quran? Should the interpretations be done according to the context, hadith, or something else? And what is the basic and Sahaba's rules of interpretation of the Quran?
Well, you see, the Sahaba didn't need to have those principles. They had the Prophet, access to the Prophet directly. They were living in the era of the Prophet, and they were good. And they had a good flair of the language as well. Most of them, and so they would just understand the text. And if there was a question, they would just go to the Prophet and ask him. And other than that, they would have discussions between themselves as well. So the Prophet would also have, the companions would also have this chance of mutual discussion. And if something would not be resolved, then they would go and ask the Prophet as well. So you see, because of the fact that the Prophet himself was available to them, they did not need to find to formulate any principles. This was something which came up later on. It came up later on because as more people entered the folds of Islam, so particular principles had to be formulated in order to interpret the Quran. And this took place in a much later time, maybe a couple of centuries after the Prophet passed away. In the meantime, people were just studying and reading the Quran and interpreting it in a natural way. And because of the fact that many of these interpretations were passed down to them by the Sahaba and by the Tabi'un and by the subsequent generations, that they just stuck to those interpretations. And we do find instances in which they discussed these interpretations and at times differed with each other. In fact, at times there were very, very strong differences of opinion. And no one forced each other to change the opinion of one another. I mean, they just continued in this very friendly way. And they gave us this lesson also, that understanding the Quran or interpreting the Quran is something that you do in your own a particular way. And if you find something which is, if someone is critiquing your understanding, then you should listen to him and listen to the voice of reason as well. So they had a very natural exchange regarding interpretation of the Quran. And because of the fact that they were naturally good scholars, I would say, at least some of them, scholars of the Arabic language, that, for example, the three famous authorities, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abdullah ibn Masud, so these were three top scholars who taught a number of students who directly interacted with the Prophet himself, and then they taught their students. And this is how the things continued. So it was much later when people from non-Arabian countries or people who professed faith once they entered the folds of Islam, that they needed to understand Arabic of the Quran, that these principles were formulated. So this is always the case, that in the first era of tabulation, things go on in their natural way, and in the next era, when there are new people joining in, that the need for formulating these principles arise, because in the first case there was no such need, as things were just being carried on in the natural way.
So then, Dr. Saleem, for a common person, how can they decide what is the actual interpretation or the meaning that the Quran is supposedly saying?
So see, there are two ways. The common person is going to either trust a scholar. You can just have a recourse, or he can just choose someone who he thinks is a celebrated authority, and he is a good scholar of the Quran. So he can just rely on the understanding. Or if he has a slightly more advanced understanding of the Quran, then what he can do is he can compare the interpretations of various scholars and give preference to one of them. So both these two ways are available. Either you trust someone and just follow what he says, but if you are on a higher pedestal in which you can actually evaluate, because you cannot expect this from everyone. I mean, for example, a person who's he's just someone who's working somewhere, or he's maybe a farmer or tilling the soil, is not that well educated. You just cannot ask him to give preference to various opinions. So what he'll do is he's going to rely on a certain opinion. But then there is a second stage, a more advanced stage, in which a person is more educated. And in such a case, what he should do is he should study all these differing interpretations and give one of them a preference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Sir Faraz Ahmed, you're up next. Please go ahead.
अस्सलामुअलैकुम डॉक्टर साहब, एक भी मैंने अहमद जावेद साहब की हमारे ही ग्रुप में किसी ने वीडियो शेयर की थी, उसमें उन्होंने एक चीज बोली कि ये जो भी एथियस्ट जो हैं आजकल के, गालिबन रिचर्ड डॉकिंस का उन्होंने जिक्र किया कि खासतौर पे ईरान में इन्होंने काफी इनकी जो है लिटरेचर को फारसी में ट्रांसलेट करके फैलाया गया है। तो उसमें उनका ये सवाल था कि जो लोग कहते हैं कि भाई अल्लाह ताला जो है वो ज़मान और मकान से ऊपर है, तो वो उनका ये कहना है कि आपकी जो नॉलेज है वो तो ज़मान और मकान तक महदूद होती है, तो उससे बाहर की जो चीज़ है वो नॉलेज में आ ही नहीं सकती, तो वो फिर कुछ भी नहीं है। तो वो इस तरह से खुदा का इनकार करते हैं। तो ये जो हम खुदा परस्त हैं, उनका क्या आर्गुमेंट है इसके लिए?
You see, the Quran itself has thrown light on the issue of the being of the Almighty. He says, "Wal awwalu wal akhiru wal zahiru wal batin." He always existed. He will always exist. He is beyond time and space. So this is an introduction to the being of the Prophet. So people who believe in God, they are asked to believe in God. I mean, not by knowing His being, but through His attributes and His practices. So atheists, the debate with the atheists is that the person of the Prophet, the person of God cannot be known. And yes, religion also says that, because God is beyond time and space. But this refers to just His physical being. As far as understanding God is concerned, the Quran takes another path. It says that yes, you cannot have any. You just cannot access God. La tudrikul absar also, eyes cannot see Him. But our knowledge of God is not based on His physical self, but on His attributes and on His practices. And this is how the Quran introduces God. The God of the Quran is something in which, is someone about whom the Quran repeatedly clarifies that you cannot access His being, but yes, you can know Him through His attributes. And that is why you'll find the attributes of God being spread all over the Quran. And also some of the practices of God, which we call the Sunan of God, the Sunan Ilahiyah, which are being mentioned in the Quran. So through His Sunan and through His attributes, we can have a fair knowledge of God. But as far as His physical entity is concerned, yes, we have been told that He's beyond time and space.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today. We have this session once the first Saturday of every month. And I would like to remind participants and viewers that the links are posted on the website, so where you're seeing this. So if you're on Facebook and you're viewing this, the link to register for this specific session is in the comments. And if you're on YouTube, if you go to the description box, you will see the link to Ghamidi.org, and from there you can search for Ask Dr. Saleem and access the link to register for this course.
Inshallah, we'll see each other next month on our first Saturday.